Morning all. Sky News has uncovered new evidence showing the strict controls that Uyghur workers are subjected to in China, including political examinations and half-military-style management. Websites there are advertising workers in batches of 50 to 100, some with security guaranteed by the government. Beijing, well, has faced growing international pressure over the issues, but calls it the lie of the century. Our Asia correspondent Tom Cheshire has our first report.
These are Uyghur workers, featured on Chinese state media, celebrating the Islamic festival of Eid al-Adha. They are not in Xinjiang, their home, but thousands of miles away, in Shandong, East China. Rights groups allege that sending Uyghurs to factories around the country is indicative of forced labor, that they are subject to strict controls as part of a policy of assimilation. China rejects those claims. But Sky News has uncovered evidence of the tight social and political controls applied to Uyghur requests for comment. We phoned some of the numbers listed. Ultimately, the government decides where workers go, another agent told us. When they get that government approval, the workers end up in factories like the one in the video. We went to Shandong to find out more. When we arrived at the seafood processing factory, it was a very different scene. There are no Uyghurs here, the factory owner told us. They have all returned home because of the pandemic. He described the idea of forced labor as nonsense, saying workers came here because they chose to, earned at least £300 per month, and had air conditioners in their on-site dormitories. But they were under close supervision. The CCTV cameras in the office monitor those dormitories. Riot control gear is also at hand. And if workers wished to leave the factory to go shopping, the owner told us, the company would drive them in 2 buses. In the meantime, he had called the police. 12 officers and Communist Party officials questioned us for 2 hours before ordering us to leave town. Our questions were not welcome at another seafood factory in the same province. For years, it has run a UK subsidiary, registered in London. This manager was waiting at the door. He told us bluntly there were no Uyghur workers here, nor had there been in the several years he had been employed at the factory. That's contradicted by photos posted in March last year on the company's website, which have since been deleted. It shows Uyghur workers arriving from Xinjiang. The accompanying announcement says that their arrival will help poverty alleviation and the integration of the national family. This is a coastal export city some 2,000 miles away from landlocked Xinjiang. It comes with a very different way of life. Uyghur workers are being sent all across China to different cities. At the very least, it is a vast labor transfer program, and it's one that requires a whole industry around it. The Chinese government has been mounting an aggressive publicity campaign in reaction to the allegations of forced labor. We were invited to this press conference in Beijing earlier this year. Questions had to be pre-submitted in order to attend. We were told this Uyghur man had taken part in the labor transfer program.
If this labor isn't coerced, if it isn't forced, why do they need government supervision?
最近境外有些人说我们去内地务工被强迫的，还受到了监视，这简直是胡说八道。我们祖国任何地方务工，去任何地方都是自己的自由。
Sky News asked the Chinese government for a response to our story, but after a week had received no reply. Even here in East China, so far away from Xinjiang, answers are hard to find.
Well, let's bring in Tom, joining us now, back in Beijing. Tom, good to see you this morning. I mean, the reporting is quite incredible. We have had plenty of evidence of the way in which the Uyghurs have been treated, but the level of control, the degree of complicity of the Chinese authorities in all of this is further revealed by your reporting.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say the Chinese government has been on a journey when it comes to representing what's happening in Xinjiang. When the first reports of these mass internment camps came out in 2017, so quite a long time ago, for a long time China denied they even existed. Then, after more and more evidence was uncovered, they said these were like boarding schools, vocational training centres. And then they said that everyone had graduated from the camps, and the focus became what happened to Uyghurs after they left these camps, whether it's in Xinjiang or outside China, as in that report, and allegations of forced labour. And China has changed its view. It's not just offensive, it's really gone on the offensive with this. Lots of documentaries being made by state media, attacks on those who say there is forced labour. It has got very, very aggressive in terms of denying what others are saying is happening in Xinjiang. And ultimately, that means it's doubling down on its strategy. Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, has said its policies in Xinjiang are absolutely correct. Despite all the international pressure there is, there doesn't seem to be any possibility of a compromise. So every new piece of evidence that is uncovered is certainly useful. But in terms of changing what's happening, it's taking a very, very long time indeed for China to modify any of its strategies in Xinjiang or in the rest of the country.
Tom, many thanks. Former leader of the Conservatives, Ian Duncan-Smith, joins us on the programme. Of course, Ian Duncan-Smith, yourself sanctioned by the Chinese last month for comments that you have made about the Uyghurs. I'm just wondering your response to that which we saw from Tom. We have plenty of evidence, of course, of the treatment that the Uyghurs have had. But Tom's reporting, I suppose, gives us just a little bit more detail of the level of interference, political interviews, military-style management that these people have to experience.
Yes, I mean, it's a very good report. He should be congratulated for having put that together. The truth is that the Chinese authorities are engaged in absolutely no question in my mind now, genocide. What they're trying to do is they're trying to eradicate an ethnic group which essentially is sort of somewhat Turkic in origin and not set the same as the Han Chinese. And they don't want them because they're troublesome. So what's actually going on now is a number of different prongs of attack. He's absolutely right. There are workers, Uyghur workers now all over the country, thousands of miles away in forced labor. But the Uyghur women particularly, they've been forced into sterilization. So you've seen in the later figures the population drop in the Uyghur population. It's a deliberate and systematic attempt to rid themselves of what they consider to be a troublesome Muslim group in one part of China. But this is not alone there, as he would certainly point out. This is going on in Tibet. There's over 500,000 now in forced labor camps. They've cracked down on Christians, had their churches smashed. Falun Gong have been arrested. Organ harvesting against their will. And I gather now there's a crackdown taking place on the Inner Mongolians over their language. This is a very specific policy by the Chinese government, which is to basically make China based on one element of ethnicity, which is Han Chinese. And I think this is shocking. The world is beginning to complain about it, but I think the Western world, the free world, has got to do a lot more than that.
You yourself have just identified this as a genocide taking place. The governments, we know, of course, of the United States and Canada have already done so. There is a vote in Parliament next week. I mean, is it your view that it is now time for the Foreign Office to step up and label it such?
Well, the government refuses to say that this is genocide because they say that only a competent court can do so. But the problem we've got is the only competent courts that can call a genocide concerning a national purpose are actually either the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. Now, China's not a signatory to the Court of Justice, rather to the Criminal Court, and the Court of Justice gets blocked at the UN in the Security Council, of which they are a member, and their allies that they pay, the Belt and Road allies, the developing world, all line up with China because they receive huge sums of money from China. China is now very aggressively pushing its own concept of how to govern and how to run areas like Xinjiang around the world. It doesn't care what we think. It lashes out at people like myself who say so, and actually is busy now trying to redact all the information that we've been using. So the latest documents, I gather, about population don't have population numbers. A whole section's been taken out of them in Xinjiang province. So you can see what's going on. They're refusing to accept. But the West has been pretty weak on all of this from start to finish.
Yeah, just in terms, though, of the levers that we hold that might perhaps compel the Chinese to change their attitudes, to change their behaviour. I mean, if they don't care what we think, then many of the kind of the tools of soft diplomacy don't really appear to be at our disposal.
Well, we need to be a lot tougher on the trade issue. The one thing China absolutely needs is a very heavy amount of trade with the free world, mostly investments, really huge investments. From countries in the free world, from the West, from America, from Britain, from places like Germany. They're very vulnerable to that trade issue. And what we should be saying to them now is we can't trade really in the same way that we do with a country that is such an abuser of human rights. We need now to start saying to the Chinese, you can't have everything you want, your cake, and eat it. In this particular case, until you stop this appalling behavior, which is ruled out at the UN, but which you are pursuing, then we now need to think about what we do about our trade. And we're already far too dependent on China for a whole range of things. The COVID outbreak showed just how ridiculously dependent we are on China. We've got to start bringing some of that manufacture and some of those elements of trade back with countries that we actually can rely on rather than with China. China is deliberately and determinedly, absolutely certain that they can get away with this because they know that the free world may bluster a bit about it, but won't do anything about it. It's time for action.
We are just about to run out of time, Serene, but I do want to kind of finish our discussion on a slightly different topic. A number of stories that have been around over the past few weeks about corruption in politics, about lobbying from former politicians. I don't need you to speak specifically to any of the stories that are around, but much as with the situation with China and the Uyghurs, there doesn't appear to be an easy solution to all of this. I mean, is there a way that we can have people who worked in politics, either in the civil service or in ministerial office, working in the private sector after that public sector employment without any questions ever being asked about it?
Well, to pick this point up, the truth is this is about people who leave government, whether it be civil servants or politicians, and go out to do other jobs. It's quite clear you can't stop people leaving government to go and do other jobs. You couldn't stop somebody leaving one company and moving to another. There's always issues about the overlap in that. They are meant to delay their arrival at another company, and that, I think, needs to be better enforced. There needs to be a time break. But also, you know, it's quite... For those who are in Parliament, those are in House of Commons, there are very strict rules, there are very strict reporting regulations and requirements. For those that leave, there needs to be a tighter concept of how they work with governments that they may have left or other governments. So everything has to be absolutely above board. There's nothing wrong in trying to promote, I don't think, some industry that may well benefit the UK, but it has to be done in a very open way. That means that this is done officially and decisions are taken in a proper process, so they can't be seen to have been influenced by a relationship with someone. All they can be seen to do is be influenced by the nature of the details and documentary evidence. So this has got to be tightened up for people on departure, whether they be civil servants. And there's absolutely no way that someone should be working both in a department as a civil servant and in a company outside. They can be seconded to companies, but they shouldn't be working in both. You can't have a foot in both camps.
Ian Duncan-Smith, good to see you this morning. Thanks very much for being with us.
Very good.